let's get started. So, oh, let me just go over some housekeeping items. Okay, you may or may not see on the screen. There's 3 things that you need to be aware of. At the bottom of your screen, you've got a chat button. That's for you to communicate with all the attendees that are here at this event. And make sure that you use the drop-down menu that says all panelists and attendees if you want to communicate with the entire group and not just the panelists. The second thing is that if you want to talk throughout the event when we're asking for questions and comments, you can raise your hand and we'll put you on. And then third, for questions and comments, as the ladies are talking about the Galapagos, if you've got something that a question that you'd like to ask, if you've got a comment you'd like to make that you want the entire group to hear, type that into Q&A and we'll monitor that throughout. So even on Pat's very first statement, if a question comes to mind, type it in. We'll get to it, all right? Enjoy yourself, and I am going behind the curtain now.
Thank you, Steve. I'm Eileen Curtis, and it is just a joy to welcome you all to our program tonight. Welcome to the 2nd edition of our virtual travel party. And as you know, we are tonight going to the Galapagos. I've had the privilege of getting an advance vision of what we're going to be seeing tonight, and it is spectacular. Our hostess tonight is going to be Pat Williams. And she's the one who wrote the chapter on the Galapagos in our book, Rome, Mindful Adventuring Across the Globe. But I'd like to introduce her with a few comments about Pat. She's been my friend for a number of years. I'm so lucky to have found her. Pat actually is very comfortable with Latin America because she spent time growing up in Costa Rica. Then she went to Northwestern University in Chicago and got her master's in Spanish, the language of South America. She is an adventurer par excellence. She rode across country on a bicycle with her husband, Dave, one time, and they also went through Patagonia. She's an athlete. She was a gold medalist, senior Olympian playing volleyball. And an entrepreneur. She started her business, an adventure travel business, which she had for a number of years. And then she started Graceful Care, which is a senior assistance company, and that is still going forward. She's also a Rotarian, and that's pretty special in my book. So please help me welcome Pat Williams.
Hello, hello, thank you, welcome. I'm glad you're all here. I can't wait to look at the list and see who all showed up and came today. We're so happy. What we're going to do today is I'm going to, oh yeah, look, Steve's done a poll. Have you been to the Galapagos Islands? Oh, about 3/4 of you said no, but I hope to go someday. And about 1/3 said yes, so good. We're going to have lots of interplay. I want to mention that we're going to have some beautiful photos, some of which were provided by the tour operator, some of which were provided by a wonderful new friend of ours. And her name is Joan Pfeiffer. Her photos are copyrighted, and she's a real photographer. I just go around with my little cell phone and the case that we can take into the water. What we're going to do today is we're going to look at the geography. We're going to look at how we get there. We're going to look at cruising and various ways to explore the Galapagos. We're going to hear about Charles Darwin when Eileen comes back on, our historian. We're going to be exploring the islands and, of course, the reason we all go, the wildlife, okay? So the Galapagos, let's start, and I am in charge of looking at the screen here.
Would you like me to set the scene for your wonderful Galapagos, Pat?
Yes, I am screen sharing. Okay.
So I found out some interesting little factoids about the Galapagos. They were actually discovered by Western people. A Spaniard named Berlanga, who was the Bishop of Panama, discovered it on a voyage to Peru. What was really interesting, though, was that a century later, in 1684, the first crude map of the islands was made by, wait for it, a buccaneer named Ambrose Crowley, who named the individual islands after some of his fellow pirates or after British royalty and noblemen. So we're going to be touring those famously named islands later. A little bit about Darwin and his attributes. I think it's really ironic that it was left to an amateur to take what he saw and light up the world with his findings. Yes, when he sailed off on the Beagle for a 2-year sail that turned into 5, he was taken on board as a kind of supernumerary with the official position of gentleman instead of mere collector. He had some expertise in geology and beetle collecting, but in all other areas, he was really a novice. Darwin was not yet the Darwin, but his student experiences in rather nilly-willy fashion equipped him with abilities in taxidermy, plant classification, and a willingness to engage in radical thinking about things such as natural selection. So on his journey on the Beagle, Darwin traveled around South America, and he and the gauchos would go out on rides into the interior to explore geology and collect fossils. And by the time the Beagle had entered the Galapagos Islands, Darwin had begun to look for evidence that linked wildlife to an older center of creation. He found mockingbirds allied to those in Chile, but differing from island to island. And by the time the Beagle left the Galapagos, Darwin was starting to consider the possibility that there might be an older center of creation. The variations he saw here eventually led to a theory that species reacting to a changing world could alter and change. This would later become codified as his law of natural selection. So with that, Pat, take it away.
Thank you, Eileen. I'm ready to go down to Latin America, have some papayas and mangoes, and move from, well, how did we get down there? Let's look at the geography. First of all, I'm sure everyone knows that we have to get down to Ecuador, right on the equator, between Colombia and Peru. And then we're going to head out to the Galapagos Islands. And there they all are. Look at all those islands. There are 18 of them. You can visit 13 of them. So, and how do you do that? You can do that on your own, or but you really have to have a reservation, and you have to be admitted to the Galapagos Islands. They're very, very protected. Thank you to Ecuador that owns the Galapagos Islands. I mentioned Joan took some of the photographs. She traveled with Abercrombie and Kent with that tour company aboard and sailed on the Eclipse around the islands. My family took a different tour company because we wanted to be able to have someone take us from place to place and have naturalists explain everything to us. So we traveled with a company that's now been overtaken by another company, but it was Go Ahead Tours. And we traveled on the Galapagos Legend, which I thought was fabulous. My family and 2 other wonderful friends of ours, my family being my husband Dave, our daughter Erin, her husband Dan, and their son who was 12 at the time, his name is Ryan. And also some friends of ours, Dr. Bierman, I think he's on the call with us, and his wife June, also came, and they took a little bit different path, and we'll talk about that. So how do you get down there if you haven't been there before? Well, it's kind of a hard trip. You really have to take an overnight flight, as flights have been operating lately. And generally you fly right into Quito in Ecuador. And then because you don't get in till midnight or after, you're pretty tired. And so you spend the night in a hotel, and the next day it's good just to rest and take a little tour of Quito. I'm sorry, this is a photographer when they went. This was Joan and her husband. Okay. So now we're in Quito. This is some of the buildings. Quito's it's about over 9,000 feet high. It's really an amazing city, very clean and pristine. You know, Steve, our behind the curtain guy is a big bike rider, and I always wanted to tell him he'd love biking up here. It's really fabulous. So we're just going to get through Quito, and then we're going to take a flight the following morning and land first in Guayaquil. And Guayaquil is on the coast. So you land in Guayaquil and then change planes, or perhaps stay on the same plane and fly to the Galapagos, to the island of Baltra. And that's where most of the flights come in. Then from Balta, you transfer on a ferry to get to the ferry dock, where you take your get aboard your Galapagos Legend or your Eclipse, and you get out to your where you take you take a little connector like Zodiac and get out to your ship, and then you're on your way. When you're traveling in Ecuador, it's very interesting. You can travel with dollars. You don't have to change any special currency, and you have to have $100 cash to get into the park. That is your fee. So this ship that I'm excited about, this was our room, but it wasn't our first room, because I decided I was going to save money and I was going to just get a room without any windows. And when you get these beds in a tiny room with no windows, and you feel like in order to get onto the bed, you just take a flying leap from the door into the bed. It wasn't very nice. So we were able to upgrade to a window cabin. We did not have a balcony, so there are also, of course, cabins with balconies. The staff is multilingual. The naturalists are multilingual. The wait staff are multilingual. This ship had a jacuzzi, which was awesome when you came back in from being out in the cold water and you wanted to warm up and sit and talk about what you saw with the other people on the ship. It had a wonderful dining room, wonderful wines and wonderful fresh seafood and fresh vegetables. And wait staff like you would have at the inn at Little Washington. They were just really, really finely trained. And there also was the big equipment room, a big room with tanks. You know, you and I who are divers and snorkelers know that when you get out of the salt water, you have to rinse off the salt off of all your equipment and hang it up to dry. This equipment room was very heavily used, not only for people who were just wanted to get their life jackets on, but for people who were actually going to snorkel and going to dive. We didn't dive on this trip because it wasn't really good diving weather. The time to go diving is from May to November, because that's when you see the sharks, the hammerhead sharks and the whale sharks. And you go to a particular island in that area, it's where you scuba dive. You can, everything we wanted to see and most people want to see, you can see by snorkeling or possibly a glass bottom boat, which also, this was our ship. It had about 50 cabins, 44 to 50 cabins. And so people want to know when to go. The time that's most popular and most expensive is school vacation time. So be it the summer or be it winter vacation. We went in January at partly school vacation and partly our grandson missed a little bit of school. And we decided this was an educational trip that merited missing some school. I'm not sure his teacher agreed, but we stuck with our plan. When you get down, okay, there's the Beagle Eileen talked about. That was Darwin's ship, and this is ours. All right, so here we are. We've just suited up for our first day in the water. There's, you can see that they offer, you can have, we rented these for, I think, $25 for the whole trip. They're shorty wetsuits or long wetsuits, and booties, keep your feet warm, and you can get snorkels and masks. Dave and I always take our own. So we had our snorkel and mask with us in our bag, but the other things like flippers are pretty heavy to carry, and we like to travel light. So they back around the corner behind Aaron and Dan and Ryan is the big equipment room. So the water temperature there is about in the low 70s. And the naturalists do programs every evening and explain with big maps and pull down charts. It's just very, very educational. There's a current that comes up from the southern Pacific, comes up into this area and brings the cold water from kind of Antarctica area and brings it up, and it's called the Humboldt Current. And so this current not only cools the water in the Galapagos, you wouldn't think you would need a wetsuit on the equator, but you do, because the water is so cool. This Humboldt Current not only brings up cool water, but it brings up a lot of nutrients that feed all the animal life, all the aquatic life that's in the Galapagos. So there are a lot of phytoplankton that is consumed by the wildlife and the fish. And you know, have you ever had Chilean sea bass? You know, the fish from South America that we bring up here is fabulous. So we had brought with us clothes that dry quickly. The weather tends to be a little damp, and of course we're in and out of the water all the time. We brought binoculars. I brought a little Dramamine to take a little bit because I can get a little motion sick. Some of our landings were wet landings, and you'd have to have on your water shoes and get into the water out of the Zodiacs every day. Some of the landings are dry landings, so you didn't have to worry about stepping into the water. So it was very interesting. Charles Darwin had written about these islands that were totally created by volcanic eruptions from under the sea. So they were, centuries ago, they were just bunches and blobs of of lava that cooled off once they erupted and formed these islands. So where did all these wonderful animals and birds come from? Well, there are a lot of theories, but this endemic wildlife that migrated here by air or by ocean is very diverse. It's very diverse in all the islands. And it just evolved, continued to evolve. As Eileen said, evolution changes everything. But the fact that there's all this growth and all these plants and animals that came out of nowhere and seem to appear, it kind of reminds me of just the weeds in my garden, that I get everything all cleaned out and all of a sudden there are weeds. Where did they come from? You know, did the birds drop things that grew? What was it? So I'm going to talk about getting off the boat. We got off the boat in groups of about 12 into a Zodiac in bouncing rough waters and into a Zodiac that's flopping up and down in the water. And it amazed me how the crew had it all arranged so that nobody tumbled into the Pacific Ocean. We had to step across the big side of the Zodiac and down into the boat, but we didn't do it by ourselves. We had to learn the grip. We had to learn that you reach out to the big strong guy that's helping you out, and he grips your arm and you grip his, and he's holding on tight. So everyone used the grip and no one fell in the water. The first sea life we saw on this last trip, and I have been there before, was got out on a beach and we were walking along the beach and there were looked like big rocks on the beach, and as we approached them, they rolled over. They were sea lions all along the beach. Let's see if I have move on to another picture. Whoops. First we had to dodge the crabs, yes. Yes. And then we came to these sea lions, and there were harems of them that would propel themselves along with their flippers on the beach, and then they would get into the water and fly away, as they can fly so fast. But they were so friendly. We just walked right beside them, and that's the magic of the Galapagos. And we're like visitors in their land. And you just kind of want to go up and give them a hug. But you know what? It was so funny. I was thinking about this. We actually were told to keep 6 feet away. So we had to social distance in the Galapagos. Snorkel or glass bottom boat, what's the best thing to do in the Galapagos? I've told you about my friends who are on this call with us, Michael and June. They decided to do glass bottom boat because they're not snorkelers. And so it was kind of like a Zodiac with a glass bottom, so they could see what was underwater, and we snorkeled. One of the best snorkeling trips we had, let's see if it's on here. Oh, first of all, to get to the boobies. We were out snorkeling actually, and up on a ledge, there were a bunch of blue-footed boobies. Did you know there are also red-footed boobies? See the red feet? That's on another island. But the blue-footed boobies were up on a ledge, and when they do a mating dance, they kind of clown around with their big feet, and that's how they got named. In Spanish, the word bobo means clown, and so they were the bobos, the boobies. So we could walk, when we were on shore, we could walk beside them and see where they nest. And they come to the edge, to the rocks along the water to fish. So one day, some more frigate birds. Oh, I got to the jacuzzi. Let me go back. So one day we were snorkeling, and Ryan we couldn't get him out of the water. He was snorkeling, loving it. We were all snorkeling together, and we found I'm sorry, I'm going to make your eyes crazy because I'm going to go ahead to the turtles. Okay, we'll go back. Okay, so we were, it's way at the end. I'm telling a story at the end. Okay, can you see here in the water what looks like rocks? Big, see on the left there, see all those, looks like rocks in the water, and we snorkeled over to see what those were all about, and they started moving too. They were the big sea turtles. So Ryan was entranced. He was chasing the sea turtles around, and there were schools of fish in there as well. And all of a sudden, he said he was so startled because a bird just torpedoed right in front of his face into the ocean to catch a fish. And I'm pretty sure it was a booby, because they have kind of air sacs in their skulls that allow them to torpedo so fast without getting a concussion. I mean, they have wide wings, like 5 feet wide, so they can torpedo into the water. Well, if you go and you can possibly take children, it's really quite magical. All the education on board, and then learning and appreciating all the wildlife at the same time. Okay, now give me patience. I'm going to scoot back up again where we were. Okay. All right. So what do you do on the islands? There's an albatross, by the way. Okay, Some of the islands are cactus covered. Some of them are flat. Some of them are very hilly. And as I said, when you come back in, you warm up in the jacuzzi. Okay. Albatross. Some of them are hard to walk on, so we're glad we brought our tennis shoes. But a lot of them are very easy walks. This is a typical trail in the Galapagos where we're walking with a naturalist, and you might just come upon a lava lizard. You might, there's Ryan walking, there we go. And you might come upon a tortoise. And this is one of the emblems of the Galapagos, is the Galapagos tortoise. The tortoise is not a turtle. We learned it, we didn't know. A turtle can go in the water. Tortoises don't go in the water. They get their liquid from their herbivores, from the plants that they chew on, and they eat quite a bit because they get to be about 900 plus pounds, and the carapace, their shell, can get to be 6 feet across. It's pretty amazing. I know that, I'm pretty sure that Joan is on this program with us, the photographer, and she said that she also, as I had the privilege of doing before 1912, meeting Lonesome George. Lonesome George was the big, big, big Galapagos tortoise that everyone wanted to see. He was enormous. I feel like he was almost as tall as I was. He was, he lived to be 100 years old, and when he passed away, he's now in the Natural History Museum in New York. You can see him there, and he's posed eating berries as he did in the Galapagos. He was the last of his subspecies. That was Lonesome George, but there are many species of tortoises. The way we discovered our first tortoise was we were walking down the trail, and the naturalist said, "Come over here," and there was just some trees and a bed of leaves, and there, hidden and hard to see, was our first Galapagos tortoise. He said, "This one's," and that's this one. This one's Chiquito. He's little. He's little. He probably only was about 200 or 300 pounds at the time. This was a tough adventure. I don't know if you can see, we took several zodiacs all at once, rounded up on this lava strip. We went there to see a particular species. But before we got on the boat to get there, I noticed that a lot of people on a cruise ship were taking out their hiking poles and unfolding them. And then the cruise ship were handing out nice wooden hiking poles to people. And I said, "Oh, we better get a hiking pole." And my husband, Dave, said, "I don't need any blankety blanket hiking pole." And so we went, started to get on the ship, and the guide said, "You better have a hiking pole." And I said, the guide said, "We need hiking poles." So I brought 2 hiking poles. Thank goodness. We got off on the island, which is the youngest and has the most active lava. It's not erupting at the moment, but it's the youngest. And so there's a lot of lava that's erupted, and you'd think it would be just like a smooth blanket, but no, it was spiky and full of holes and spiky, and so you needed poles to maneuver. Some people still fell and gashed a leg. It was very difficult, and it's because we got there at low tide. I think we've gotten there at high tide, it would have been a little different. But it was a challenging arrival, but we got past the lava and back onto the shore, and then we got to see the iguanas. Amazing, amazing iguanas. We saw them babies playing in pools. We saw them mating. We saw them spitting out what looks like they're spitting water, but they're cleaning the salt out of their systems. It was very, very interesting. One of the islands that I had been on in my first trip to the Galapagos, there was a pool where we could go in the water and swim with the baby sea lions. And that to me was another real highlight. We didn't do it on this trip, but swimming with the baby sea lions, because they play, they dive and they play and they jump around, and if you go in with your snorkel on and you imitate them, then you do something and they imitate you. It's just really, really fun. You can interrupt me anytime if there's a question or a comment.
Yeah, Pat, would you like to take a few questions? There's some good
sure.
ones.
Sure.
I'm happy to read them, or Eileen, if you've got them on your screen there. Oh, you're muted. Here, unmute yourself, but I'll read a few. Nancy Costa says, how many passengers on the ship?
Okay, there were 44 staterooms, and each one had mostly had 2 people or 3. So there were close to 100 people.
And did you do the southern or the northern route?
Well, the route that we did, I showed it at the first map.
Okay.
We didn't cover. That's a good question, because it reminds me that you can spend 4 days or you can spend 2 weeks there. So what I wanted to do was decide what I wanted to see and look at which boats went there and make it the length of time that would cover the things that I wanted to see and could afford.
And I don't know if Karen and Phil Magley are, if this is tongue in cheek or not. It says, is this $100 per person?
Yeah, the $100, that's your admission fee. I wish. Yeah, it's an expensive kind of once in a lifetime trip, but the first one I did as a travel agent, so that was free. But this one, it is, but it's totally worth it if you can plan it ahead. It really is. You know, and I just wanted to tell you about some of the islands, because there's I can tell you what's on some of these islands. In Santa Cruz, the cacti and the ferns that you saw at first, a lot of visitors spend time there because there are tunnels and coves and things to see there. Fernandina is the volcanically active island. You can usually see the albatross in April to November on Fernandina Island, on Punta Espinosa Island, excuse me. Isabela is the largest one, where they have the Galapagos, where the Galapagos tortoises are. Española, you can see the waved albatross and the lava lizards. They're frigate birds, and the red-tailed boobies are on Genovese Island. Rábida has a maroon sandy beach. It's great snorkeling there. There's not good snorkeling everywhere, but there's good snorkeling there. And at Darwin Island, that's where you can dive with the sharks and see pods of dolphins, but that's kind of far out, and that's where the people who go on a dive trip spend more time. Is there another question?
Well, no questions, but I wanted to let you know I put up your second poll. Okay. And it looks like half of the folks have taken it, and I'll reveal the results here, and this may spur some conversation on your part to sort of see what people would want to do. So here, let me end the polling and share the results. And so this is what the audience would like to do. What are your thoughts on that? What was your favorite thing, Pat, out of those?
Well, I did try out the glass bottom boat one final day just to see what it was. I had snorkeled the whole time before that, and the visibility was so much better. So you're snorkeling with a life vest on and a wetsuit that also keeps you buoyant. So I highly suggest that people learn how to snorkel somewhere in the pool or the Caribbean before they go, because it's better. But if you're definitely not going to get in the water, then glass bottom boat's the way to go.
Cool.
Okay.
Let's see. Sharon Canner asks, I visited about 4 years ago in October. Fabulous time to go.
In October, you like it? Okay, that's good. That's good to know. Okay, Steve, I'm not able to scroll.
Remember, use your keypad instead of your cursor. Like, just press the down arrow or the
Okay.
up
That's not working either.
arrow.
Stop share. I'm still sharing.
Yeah. These are the technical difficulties that we deal with.
All right.
Well, if you'd like, I could. I've got it, so we can.
Right.
If you want to stop share, I could share mine.
You could do yours. Okay. So there is still, it's very interesting. There's still a tortoise rescue center down there on the Big Island, and I highly recommend visiting it to see how they're rehabilitating tortoise and helping make it easy for them to breathe and keep going. There we go. All right. Thank you.
So I'm here, and you can kind of. I'm flipping through to
go
get
way down.
You know, but I don't know if you were going to hold off on this, but you didn't say anything about this photo here.
Okay, well, that's just to show the latitude. This is to show that we were actually at 0 degree latitude on the equator. And that's something we hadn't thought about. You know, when you're right in the middle at 0 degree latitude, you really don't have a change of seasons. And it was very interesting. There were, in our book, there are a lot of funny things that we did on, this was in Ecuador, on the mainland, some funny things that we did that have to do with being on the equator, but I'm not going to go into those today.
Okay.
So I'm
just going to get to.
Sorry, everybody, for that. Keep on going.
Beautiful photos. Look at that. Now this is on your boat.
On the boat. Yep. Yep. There's Dan.
Just tell me when you want to stop and make a comment.
Okay. There are some Galapagos penguins. Back up. There, the penguins. Yeah, that was pretty great.
Definitely don't think about penguins on the equator, right?
No. So before we go there, okay, so let's see what we did here. What we did at the end was we flew back to the mainland, and we went up beyond the airport and north of Quito to a residence called Hacienda Selecta. It's an estate that's been in the hands of the president of Ecuador since 1898. It's a fabulous, beautiful estate. You're spoiled with the finest wines and cheese and pond-caught trout. And they have a big stable of Andalusian quarter horses that you are invited to ride. And they said, oh, señora, come with us. We'll ride down the mountain and up a volcano. And so we all decided to do that because Dan wanted to ride and Aaron and Ryan wanted to ride. And we started out down the hill. And there was really no trail, and it was steep downhill, and it was rugged, and there were streams we had to cross. And we've all ridden horses before, but I was holding on to the horn like you're not supposed to, because I was so afraid I was going to fall off this horse. And he kept saying, "Quiere galopear? Do you want to gallop?" And I kept saying, "No, gracias." And it was very interesting. There's a condor rescue station there. This is really a wonderful stop that I recommend. kind of getting your feet back on land before flying home or flying off to some other place. And Steve had a little poll he was going to offer about some other places, some that you may know and some you may not know, that are some special places in South America.
Pat, while that poll is on the screen, let's see. You've got a couple of questions. Mary Ellen Connect says, is there any crossing the equator celebrations?
I think we've made a bigger celebration crossing the line. What's the line in the United States where you, as Dave says, the penny rolls down to one ocean one way and one ocean the other way? What's it called? The high point, the middle point of the United States? No, we didn't. But to stand on a line that is demarked as the equator is pretty exciting. But no, it was really all about the animals. I couldn't get out of Quito fast enough when we arrived. I wanted to get right out there to the Galapagos. We're water people. We love the water.
And this is really interesting. Christine says, did you learn how American whalers burned at least one of the islands and carried off and ate thousands of tortoises?
Yes, thank you for mentioning that. I meant to mention that. It's true, and that's why it's been so hard to keep the tortoises. The whalers love their meat and use them for oil, and so tortoises couldn't run away from them. So the whalers, that's true, they would come and rob the islands of the tortoises. Yeah.
Let's see. The poll is going. We're getting. I want to get to 50%. We're about at 45%. Right. So a few more people will.
I just want to say, kind of in talking about the mindfulness that we bring into our stories, that we all travel for many reasons. We travel to relax, we travel to learn, we travel to do good deeds. But we added mindfulness as imbibing the magic in particularly in this trip. It's a sudden awareness where you're sitting in the midst of a volcanic eruption, islands that are in the middle of a vast ocean, and we realize they're each just a tiny particle in the midst of huge magnificence. Magic is really like standing beside birds and animals who are not threatened by us, who are our equals in the Galapagos.
Oh, that's great, Pat. And here I'm going to end the polling and share the results. And looks like Machu Picchu is the winner, but Easter Islands. And have you been to all these places, Pat?
Not all of them. I've been to most of them, but not to the Easter Islands, no. So well, that's very interesting. Yeah, thank you for the poll, Steve. That was a great idea.
Did you want to comment on these photos here? Or had you already?
This was Hacienda Selecta. This is where we spent the last night. And now I'm still not able to scroll down and I want to show.
Well, no, I've got to do it here.
Okay, there, that's what you can go right to the final slide there that you posted after there we go.
Yeah.
Eileen, are you back on?
Oh,
yes,
here.
I'm here. How to find the button. So I think everybody on the call knows that Pat and I wrote this book, Rome, and the Galapagos is one of the 7 chapters contained in there. Last week we talked about our chapter on walking the Camino, and we've been able to treat you to such fabulous, fabulous pictures of the Galapagos today. And the stories, Pat, that you shared with us, just the curiosities day by day really made this story pop for me. just a beautiful array of pictures and landscapes and waterscapes. I want to go. I want to go. So, do we have other questions or comments from those who have traveled there or may want to?
Yeah, this is a pretty good one that I'm curious about too. Is Nancy Costa asks, were any of the wildlife aggressive?
Ooh.
Not at all, but we were threatened, we were advised to stay away from the bull sea lions, to stay away from that, especially if you were going to go play with the children, with the babies, that they might come and attack. So we did, but no aggression anywhere.
Lori asks, how many trips have the two of you been on together?
Let's see. The first trip I think we did was to London for a weekend. And then we went to Costa Rica twice, the second time with our husbands. And then we went on the Camino, and then we went to Nepal, and then to Santa Fe. So what's that? 6?
In Nepal, by the way, we stayed in a Buddhist monastery, and that to us was extremely interesting. So
yes, that will be an upcoming program, and it's a really interesting slice of life, unlike anything else you can imagine.
And the trip to Santa Fe, we had both been there, but we did it differently this time, and it was pretty cool. So Eileen and her husband went to Turkey, and that's what she's going to talk about next Friday.
Yeah, and Pat Kunal says that she enjoys the program and she's looking forward to Turkey next week. Let's see, Georgia says, I arrived late. Is it possible to see the session again? Yes, Georgia, we're recording this and we'll email it out to everyone. Karen Wilson says, I relate to your observation about feeling like a tiny particle. And then Joan Nam says, my granddaughter swam with the sea lions and had a good time.
I want to tell you something Joan told, yes, your grand, I want to tell you something else Joan did that was interesting to me. She didn't get on a cruise ship. She said they thought it would be better to stay on the main island and then take a boat every day to a different destination. So that's another way to do it. It's reasonable. You can make your own schedule. You can be out or not be out or stay on the mainland. But you're a bit limited because some of the destinations are a little far for a day trip. So that's the trade-off. But I thank Joan for that.
And Pat, you had mentioned that you hadn't been to Easter Island. By any chance, Eileen, have you been there? Because Francie Palmer says that she'd love to go.
Yeah, and so would my husband. It's been on his A list for a long time, as have been the Galapagos. No, we've been to Argentina and Peru. So those are our 2 South American claims at the moment.
I am gonna bring on Karen Toman. She's got her hand raised, and hopefully Karen.
Right, here I am. Yeah, I wanted to ask about if you had. You talked about the wildlife, and wanted to know how did you notice anything in particular about the iguanas? I have kind of an interesting story to tell about them myself.
Oh no, I'd like to hear your story,
Karen.
Okay, well, we were vacationing in the Virgin Islands and on St. Thomas actually, and the place where we were staying had a saltwater pool that overlooked the ocean. And it was surrounded by palm trees and so forth. The iguanas lived in, and they eat plants. They lived in around that area in the with the vegetation. But it turns out that vacationers who would sit on the pool deck got used to feeding them. So the iguanas got used to being on the pool deck looking for food. And of course they eat plants. They don't bother people. They're actually quite gentle. They sort of live and let live as far as you're concern was my experience. They were fun to look at. People would feed them and sort of, tempt them with food, and then they would eat and look up expectantly, and then they, a few 4 inches away, someone would put something down, and they'd go eat that, and then look up expectantly. And so one time, there was this woman sitting on a lounge chair, and she had a drink on the side of her, on the hand where her hand was, and it had a cherry and a pineapple sticking out of it. And the iguana just sort of looked up at her, and she looked down at it, and all of a sudden it jumped, or we think for this pineapple and this cherry, but I don't know where that ended up, because the distraction was this woman shrieked loudly and jumped probably 5 feet or something. That, anyway, I think it scattered and was scared. Anyway,
we all have our iguana stories, don't we? That's a great story, Karen.
Yeah.
Mine, what happened in Costa Rica when the two couples were there, and we had settled into around a pool for drinks. It was sunset, and suddenly this iguana showed up, and I screamed, and I went running for the guard at the property to tell him that there was a monster in our midst.
Well, they certainly look like, if you look at them closely, they remind you of miniature dinosaurs in a way.
Right.
At least that was the observation of someone else. And finally, we had to go to one of the attendants and ask them to ask the gentle iguanas if they would play somewhere else for a while this person, got back her, became calmer.
Good story. Thanks for sharing.
Thanks for letting me.
You both have an iguana tale?
Well, we got Joan with her hand raised. Joan?
Well, I guess in terms of stories, I just have one that's kind of interesting about the Galapagos, because Pat talked about social distancing, and it is important. When we were there, it was a family trip, and my daughter, who was then about 8, so she was probably one of the smaller people on the beach. There was, I guess you would call it a pup sea lion, a teenager, who was fairly friendly and comfortable, and came up the beach, and then came down in between my 2 daughters, and they probably weren't 6 feet away. And I remember as a mother initially being mortified by this, but so the sea lion came up and then suddenly twisted its neck and took a bite out of her leg. Now, mind you, this was not a bite like, gonna kill you bite. The sea lion was really just playing, because my daughter was a little bit more his size. But of course she bled. And what was interesting about it was it actually ended up being a very positive experience, which sounds kind of strange, but for 2 reasons. One, the guide, this had never ever happened before, and probably hasn't since, but do stay away, because they are very friendly, and he was just being playful. They took my daughter into the water, they washed off her leg, it wasn't bad. And because, of course, today, they probably would have shot the sea lion, they would have been paranoid, but because, it's so beautiful and natural there are no diseases, all these animals, have lived by themselves and away from anything that would be dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter just kept playing on the beach, and then they took her back to the boat, and they did give her some antibiotic cream. And then she wrote her college essay about, years later, about being bitten by a sea lion and having now the blood of a sea lion, and wanted to take a bite out of everything Earth had to offer. And so it's been this lasting kind of wonderful, unusual memory.
The things that are terrible at the moment enter into the family lore.
Yes, it's in the family lore.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was quite something. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, but I totally agree on the mindfulness and just watching, getting so close to these birds when they're laying their eggs, watching a mother bird feed its baby by, joining heads and basically regurgitating her food. It's just astounding that you can be that near the animals, and the respect that we show them and they show us. I totally agree with you, Pat, about that.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you.
Well,
Great.
we're drawing close to the end of our hour together, and I
We got a few more hands that are raised.
Oh, we
you
do.
wanna- yeah.
Okay, I'll tell you what. I'm going to do a close, but then we can hang for anybody who wants to stay around with us. How about that?
Okay.
All right. So first off, I want to say thank you to Pat and to Joan for your pictures. But that was a magnificent trip through the Galapagos, and
Oh, I have one more thank you. Sorry, Eileen.
uh-huh.
I don't know if you can still see it, but the picture behind me, Aaron brought that from Cuba. That's a Cuban artist, and it wasn't the Galapagos, and it wasn't a fake screen. It's a real painting. So thank you, Aaron.
Okay. Thank you, Aaron. So next week, just to give you a sample of what's going to happen next week, we're going to Turkey, which is one of the most exotic lands. And just as we saw some of the most beautiful creatures of creation on the planet, next week we're going to see some of the most beautiful buildings ever created by man, and some of the most spectacular geological formations that have blessed this planet. We're going to tour the bazaar, the Grand Bazaar, which is ranked as one of the top tourist attractions in the world. The very historic churches of Hagia Sophia and the Blue Mosque, the Palace of Topkapi with its harem rooms, and all of the stories that attach to that are wonderful. We're going to visit a performance of the Sufis, which will be a very transcendental moment. They are an amazing religious cult with a dance that is spectacular. We're going to take a ride on the Bosporus come eventide, and then we're going to go into Cappadocia, where those fairy mounds and amazing formations in the underground cities are. So I hope you'll join us for that, because it's a really special place to see. Not many of us get a chance, especially in these days, to see Turkey, but this will be an opportunity. All right, I turn that back to you all. Steve, do you want to take us away with questions?
Yeah, we got two more hands raised. Next is Pat Kunel. Pat?
What?
Pat?
I'm here.
No, Pat Kunel.
Oh, the Pat.
Sorry. Okay, and Pat, if you can, but well, let's try Erin Williams. We've heard her name.
He knows her.
Looks like Pat is unmuted.
Hi. Can you hear me okay?
This is Erin. Okay, yes.
This is Erin. Yes, hi. So, gosh, Mom, thank you so much. And thank you, Eileen, for this wonderful virtual trip back to the Galapagos. It was really, really lovely. I wanted to share just an observation. There were a lot of stories about aggressive iguanas, and I did experience some aggressive ones in Fort Lauderdale, but I'll say my experience in the Galapagos of the iguanas and all the animals there was that they were remarkably passive. But it was one of the most amazing things to me about them was how they were not aggressive toward us, and how sort of just unafraid. You actually had to watch where you stepped, because you might accidentally step on an iguana or step on some other form of, life in the area. So it was really remarkable. And it was such an amazing trip that Ryan, who was at the time 12 and has his entire life been quite interested in and proficient in all forms of electronics, the trip was so good that at the end of our time on the boat, with no Wi-Fi for the entire span, Ryan didn't want to leave. So that, I think, was one of the biggest endorsements that I can give to the Galapagos, and to taking kids there, and to just the amazing experience of being that close to that sort of wildlife. So thank you for taking us back.
Thank you, honey.
Okay, and Pat Kunel, by any chance, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. And I really want to thank both Eileen and Pat for this wonderful adventure. We are adventurers as well. And both Ralph and I are just so excited to see what unfolds each week. And hope everybody continues to bring so many different places of the world that we have traveled much of the world, but we love seeing it again. Maybe see some things we haven't seen before.
Yeah, thank you, Other Pat. I appreciate your comments. Yeah. Steve, is there a way we could all Zoom and see each other now, or?
Sure. So let me.
People don't mind?
Yeah. So here's what we did last time is that if you'd like to display yourself reveal yourself to the world, if you raise your hand, I will move you over to the panelist and you can share your screen there. This takes a while, guys, but everybody's raising their hand. I'm promoting you to panelists.
Good.
And then I will allow you to share your video and we will be in business here.
And I'd just like to say, while you're doing that, Steve, I think that one of the things that makes this a very special hour is the opportunity to be with you fellow travelers. We love hearing your stories and we're glad that you like ours, but the connectivity over one's travel memories really is a wonderful way to have a special bond. So thank you.
Yeah, this is our party.
Yes, our party.
I think we got Diane here.
There's Lori. Hi, Lori. And Karen. Hi. And there's Karen Magley. And Joan Pfeiffer. Thank you for the pictures. And Erin, it's good to see you.
Great. So the remaining folks, if you want to raise your hand and kind of join the Brady Bunch, you're more than welcome. If you want to just sit and observe, that's great too.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, and thank you all for coming. So hope you'll come back next Friday and bring a cup of special Turkish tea or something. At least find a China cup, and we'll go traveling together.
I have a question for Pat and Eileen. And that is, did you try, when you were talking about snorkeling, did you try one of those masks, the snorkel helmets or whatever?
Thank you. I meant to mention that. I had never seen one before. And one day we were snorkeling off the beach and a lady had one. It's just a big round thing that fits over your whole face and the snorkel's built in. And I said, what's that? She said, this is my beginner snorkel mask. And I said, can I try it? And she let me try it, and it was great. It was really so much easier than the mask and this floppy snorkel. It really was totally.
What is your opinion about wearing glasses?
Yeah, that would be it'd be a good way to wear glasses.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that, Lori. I really appreciate it. And she had gotten it, I think, at Costco or someplace where they had some sports equipment, and I don't know the name of it, but it's a total. Is
it like this right here?
Do you have one? Yeah, thank you. Oh, whiz, yes. That's right. Full face snorkel mask.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, my husband Art and I were supposed to go to Cancun back in March or April or something. So of course that got canceled, but we were curious about those masks, if anyone had tried them.
Yeah, I recommend it.
I was supposed to be cruising the Panama Canal last March.
Oh,
I feel your pain.
Yeah, otherwise I would have been in Ireland with Encore right now.
Yes, that's right.
You know, if that had panned out, but you know, such is life.
Where were you going to be in Ireland?
Well, we would have been there right now and returning on June 6th.
Yes, but where in Ireland?
Oh, where? Oh, I don't remember the itinerary.
Oh, okay.
Once it got canceled, it was like out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah.
It was our corral trip, Eileen.
Sorry?
It was the corral trip.
I know. I didn't remember where they were going to be, though.
Yeah, I think they were going to all the good places in the south.
I did a trip. I've been to Ireland twice, once with my husband and once with my sister, and that was a stitch because she's a stitch. We did some crazy, crazy things.
We'd have been in Amsterdam and Belgium and seeing all the tulips.
Mm.
And that got canceled too.
And that's such a world famous draw, isn't it? Those tulips. Do you know, I was on a show with Viking earlier this week, and the historian was talking about tulips in the 17th century. Holland was apparently the richest country in the world at that time, and they would spend money on crazy fads. And one of them was a tulip fad that happened. And there was a particular parrot tulip with the striated, beautiful crimsons with whites going on. And that cost, oh, I'm going to make up a number, but it's in the range, probably $100,000. So people spend money in crazy ways.
Oh, Bert just left. I was going to ask him. He's in Tyson's Rotary, so I was going to ask. I know he's traveled a lot. They usually do a raffle to a villa for a villa in Spain every year. I don't know. They'll probably skip it this year. Well, y'all are fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah.
Pat, before you go, there was a question about seasickness, which I thought was kind of interesting. I'm prone to it, and in order to dive, which I do or I did, I have to worry about taking medicine, and even in some boat trips. But I find I did not have a problem with it snorkeling. In my experience.
Yeah, I never know when I'm going to feel a little queasy because we dive and snorkel, and I've had it on a sailboat, and because we sail a lot, so it I'll get like the big chewable one, and then I'll just take a little bit of it. Just it gives me like a sense of comfort. I'm not sure if it really makes a difference, but I have a little bit of one, and then I feel protected.
Well, I had some things that, well, some years ago when it first came on the market, it was something called Marazine. That helped me. The Dramamine doesn't really help me much, but the Marazine did. I remember
Mine one did.
Yeah, and it was over the counter. I'm sure by now they probably have other things. You know, I haven't dived or snorkeled in a while, so I haven't really looked into it since then. But anyway, it's just an interesting subject to me.
Yeah, and there's a difference too on whether you want the one that makes you makes you sleepy or keeps you wide awake, because that depends on what you're planning to do, right?
That's right.
Have you tried the patch, which is
Yes, I did. It made my head feel twice its size.
You know, I know one person on a cruise that we went on with the chamber, and she had a bad reaction to it. I have loved the patch. It actually gave me back my life for being on the water, because I am very prone to seasickness. So
I was certified in Bermuda and had to wear a patch in order to do the test. So I took it off afterwards, and of course felt a lot better. So I didn't really have a great, great experience with it.
My story of the patch is that we were with a group of, the table of 6 had just sat down to dinner. We were on a cruise ship in the Baltic, and suddenly a storm came up, a really bad one, and the boat began to pitch wildly. And you just watched the whole dining room empty out. And everybody at my table was going, "Oh no, I get seasick." And I said, "Hold on just a minute." I ran to my stateroom, grabbed the patches, and we all dined and had a wonderful time alone in this big dining room.
I found that Dramamine makes me very sleepy, enough so that I totally miss 2 or 3 hours of a trip. I take it.
Yeah.
So I take ginger capsules, and I've been shocked at how much that helps.
That's it? Okay.
Yeah.
Nice to know.
Well, I took the patch on the Adriatic on a cruise, and very small boat cruise, and it worked great, and I had no problems falling asleep because I was awake. It was during the daytime.
Part of the problem was that they recommended that I take
Good to see you, Pat. Good to see you.
Hi, Nancy.
I'll be back next Friday, but I have to go now. So
where's your next trip that you?
Oh, I just had to cancel one to Singapore and Bali. So we were supposed to go in June. Next year.
Okay,
Baby.
good talking to you all.
All right, well, I think it's time to say au revoir, and we will see you
Adios.
next week. And thank you for coming. I've enjoyed your stories. I hope you enjoyed what Pat had to present. How could you not? It was gorgeous. All right, have a
Adios.
great weekend. Adios.
Adios.
You
Thank
guys.
you. Merci.